So Area 51?
Mm-hmm.
That was Area 57.
Oh.
So I've worked at Area 57. And believe it or not, there's a lot of people that have UFOs or have sophisticated test dummies like they have now. So they'd use monkeys, and they'd and they wouldn't stop it at the end of the track. They just launch them right off the cliff and fly almost into hurricane. I mean, it's crazy. I'm like, what are you guys doing up here? And they're like, well, we're launching monkeys, I guess, in the 50s or whatever. It breaks the sound barrier. It's on the ground, right? And you'll see this pressure wave go boom. So there's a hangar that has all their old test dummies.
Uh-huh.
And they're creepy looking. They're faceless. And if I was in there alone one time and I'm looking at it, it's just I got really kind of creeped out. They're just hanging on the wall. They look like they're going to jump off.
Welcome to the Jeff Glines Show, where success isn't just about the destination, but the journey. Behind every success story lies untold challenges and lessons. I'm Jeff Glines, and I'm here to take you behind the scenes with business leaders and entrepreneurs. We'll explore the real stories behind the success, the challenges, the late nights, and the breakthroughs. If you're looking for raw, real insights into the world of business, you're in the right place. Subscribe to the Jeff Glines Show on your favorite podcast platform. Join us for new episodes every week, and let's dive into what it really takes to succeed. Okay, we'd like to welcome Paul Southwick. His journey started in the days of tinkering with VHS decks, editing home movies the old school way. From there, he drove headfirst into cuts-only linear editing, then jumped into nonlinear hardware systems. Now he's rocking today's modern desktop editing suites. It's been a wild ride, but Paul's passion for storytelling has kept him ahead of the curve every step of the way. He's done it all, starting at SUTV Channel 9, then moving to KSGI Broadcast TV and Falcon Cable TV. From there, he sharpened his skills at the studio film video production studio before launching his own business, Strategic Media. Whether it was TV, cable, or his own production company, Paul's always found a way to make magic happen behind the camera and in the editing room. Along the way, he's picked up some pretty amazing insights. He's not just about the tech, he's about the craft, the workflow, and creating content that connects. From the chaos of early editing systems to building a successful production business, Paul's journey shows just how far passion and adaptability can take you. He's more than an editor. He's a storyteller who's been shaping the way we see and hear stories one project at a time. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Awesome intro. I love that. Appreciate that. Yeah, I feel like I've listened to some of your other podcasts, and you have this great, like a radio voice intro. It's like, welcome to Mix 95. We're on the air.
Well, that brings me to my first question. We're going to walk down memory lane here.
Okay.
From our first small feature film called Josh.
Yeah.
Paul and I went to school together at Southern Utah University, and I had asked him to help me out with this small feature film because I didn't really know how to run a camera. I mean, let's be honest. Paul knew how to run a camera pretty good, those big, bulky cameras. It was back in 1992, I believe, 92, 93, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And anyway, you helped out with the editing. We had the old school video tapes. What do you call those big old tapes that you?
The 3/4 inch U-matic tape.
Yes. Okay. So
that's it.
So we can talk a little bit about Josh, the movie that we made, and also just maybe some. The question really is what's some of your favorite memories from the college days, and how did those experiences shape your career path?
Okay. Well, yeah. So just before we did Josh, I did during the summer, I did a special project, which was my own little movie called Self-Assassin. So it was sci-fi.
Oh, nice.
Basically, you duplicated, and then your duplicate has to kill the mortal one, and then there's an immortal calf, and you have to do it, or the timeline police will come get you. And so after doing that, then John Smith said, "Hey, Jeff's doing this project. Do you want to help him out?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Let's do the project." So that experience of doing that. So it was the first time I worked with actors. There was a handful of actors that worked for the Shakespeare Festival during the summer, and on our off days we'd shoot Self-Assassin. And so I built a set in my garage. That was, and
I haven't seen this film. Where are you even hiding it? I want to see this.
Well, yeah, I found the first edit of it. I couldn't find the final one, unfortunately, because it was 92. So
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna try to upres it, because it's standard definition. And then I'll get you a copy of it or send you
Yeah.
a link like you did for
Yeah.
Josh. So, but
Oh
anyway,
yeah.
yeah, just yeah.
Mine,
So
mine was just a heartfelt Christmas story,
yeah, yeah, mine's transmissions from the future. They tell who needs to be immortal and who needs to be taken out, and
That sounds way better than mine.
yeah. So we did that, and then I edited it together, and then after they kind of showed some other people that are in acting and theater, like 30 of them said, we want to do Self Assassin 2. And I was like, no, I'm done with that. I've got other things I want to do. I think if I would have done that, I would have went into film production,
Uh-huh.
because they had lighting guys, technical people, way more actors. I'm like, I could have done a whole movie with everything I needed.
Uh-huh.
So I kind of wondered what that would be like, because maybe I'd be in Hollywood and there'd actually be a good movie coming out every once in a while. But I went the you know the broadcast production,
Uh-huh.
cable TV route. So, but very similar. I mean, in some
And that's what kind of
similar.
that's. I mean, we were in the communication program, obviously, and it wasn't like a film school or anything like that.
Right.
But some of these projects we worked on just kind of helped. And funny thing is I ended up not even pursuing any type of video production or anything like that. I did check into USC film school. It just at the time it was just too expensive, and I didn't go down that path. And I did shoot a couple films, one with John Denver. I don't know if you
Nice.
knew that,
No, I
but it
didn't know
was
that.
yeah, it was his last feature film. Jeff Glines here, and before we get back to the show, I just want to share a quick tip for all you business owners. If you haven't heard of dual pricing when it comes to payment processing, then I want to share my free guide on how to eliminate 100% of your credit card fees in your business. And I'll share a link in the description. Go ahead and click on that link. You're not going to want to miss this, and you can thank me later. Back to the show. Before he was in a plane wreck or something like that, he crashed.
The plane crash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but I drove him to and from the set. I wasn't really on the filming side of it, but I was like craft service, and I did some of the set design. Yeah, the grunt worker,
Yeah, you got to get in there and do it at some level, right? So, but yeah, but before I wasn't going to go into TV production. I was doing music and political science. And then a girl I was dating, she had the beginning TV class, and she's like, I'm editing this project, because when I did home movies, it was just 2 VCRs and like crudely like hitting pause and record, and I'm like, oh, I missed it, and there's no really control of anything. So she had me come into the edit bay, and it's cuts only editing, and she's like, here's how it works, and I'm like, it's like going from a typewriter to a word processor. I'm like, whoa, it's like it's built to do this. So I'm like editing her thing, and she's just like, yeah, go for it. And I'm like, brr, and Lionel Grady comes walking in. He's like, who are you? What are you doing in here? You're not in the class. And I'm like, oh, I was just helping it. And he's like, he's like, well, what have you done? And he plays back. He's like, you did all that? I'm like, yeah. He goes, you should take a TV class. I'm like, really? He goes, well, yeah, you haven't even taken a class, and you did the project already. So I'm like, okay. So that kind of, I was like, all right, maybe this is something to look at. So, I can give you some more experience in SU, or we can.
No, yeah. I was just curious. What kind of from just doing that? Is that kind of what launched you into the cable and the TV industry? Then it's just taking some of those classes.
Yeah, I took those classes, and I just wanted to immediately like do like crazy stuff, like creative stuff and video essays, and I got to intern when they did the Utah Summer Games, and Channel 2 comes down and puts their whole apparatus in there, and I did some video essays. And then Bill Markroff, I don't know if you remember him.
I don't.
He gave me this awesome plug on air. He's like, Paul Southwick, editing extraordinaire, did this video. So I take the footage, the camera crews that go out and shoot all this footage, I'd take it and put it into this fun video essay.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm like, yeah, this is fun. I like this.
Yeah.
It's that's why I liked it. It was fun. It was fun. So,
Well, so when did you start up your own company? When did you?
well, it was after, went from KSGI, Falcon Cable, then the studio that's a production house.
Uh-huh.
And then after that, that's when I started to, so I found a used Stratosphere from a production company in Maine.
Oh, uh-huh.
And they went to NAB, National Association of Broadcasters.
Uh-huh.
So they flew in, brought it in. I met with them and bought it. And that started Strategic Media. And actually, KSL owned the local TV station down here.
Uh-huh.
And so I embedded another guy that was left the studio before me. I did. He was their sales guy. And so I embedded in them. They said, like, hey, why don't you just set up your sphere, because that's very valuable to what we do. And KSL had 2 Stratospheres at the time.
Uh-huh.
So I did commercials. I gave them a good rate, and they gave me, free office space and just sent me work constantly.
Yeah.
So that started it off, and then it just kind of evolved through a lot of different people, companies, structures of how production's done. And so
That's interesting. So you don't even use like the tools that are kind of out there to a lot of the people, the Adobes, the CapCut, all that stuff. Those are just scratching the surface compared to this Stratosphere, this Vegas Pro that you're using.
Well, this is the interface. Well, I do use. Speaking of Adobe, I use Adobe After Effects.
Oh, okay.
So, for like compositing, stuff like that. So, I mean, there's a lot, like there's DaVinci, they're really good. Premiere does, like I said, it does a lot. I mean, there's pros and cons with all editing systems.
I see.
When I talk about the kind of the differences, it's just sharp tools. It's just kind of like a surgeon. If you have a whole bunch of clutter stuff, it just doesn't make it an efficient system.
Oh, gotcha.
But so After Effects. So when I was at the studio, we had this system there, and when I first got working there, I was like, "What's this program?" And there was After Effects, but it wasn't Adobe. It was COSA After Effects. Adobe bought it later on.
Oh,
and so I'm like, they didn't even know they had the program on there. And so I went on there and I was like, "Wow, this is interesting. You can keyframe it, and you can have text do cool things." So that's kind of my first. And then I did this animation, and they're like, "How'd you do that? Like, where did that come from?" And so I was like, "You got a program sitting here that does a lot of cool stuff. It takes forever to render because the computers back then were really slow." So that's why the hardware was kind of king, and even cameras, everything. I think we talked about this before. Nowadays, you can buy a 4K camera for hardly anything, but back then, just a standard broadcast quality camera, $20,000, $25,000, $15,000. You can have a $9,000, $20,000, $15,000 lens. So
crazy.
Yeah, it was the gateway into that was way expensive.
Yeah. I just use for my social media stuff. I'm using a little system. I got so frustrated with Adobe just because I'm like, I just need something simple. So I use CapCut, and it does everything I need for social media stuff. It's not doing big productions or anything, but works great for social media, adding captions and stuff like that. Yeah. So with your business, starting your business, how did you go about, I guess, getting jobs and work and things like that? You had KSL giving you jobs, but what was some other things that you did as far as trying to get more opportunities for your business?
Yeah, well, when I first started out, I was like, well, I got to make sales calls. I've got to call businesses. And so I did. I'd call them up. They're like, hey, do you want to do a commercial? And they're like, yeah, I guess so. Then then I began to realize, like, well, you got to have some distribution, or they got to have some reason to do a commercial. And so I early on, I mean, really early on, I realized that if I'm spending time selling, I'm not spending time producing because it's a linear income just doing
Yeah.
production. So that's why the embedding in the station, and then eventually I went over to Spiral Studios, and we kind of all were in the same building. At one point, we kind of formed a group. We had a web guy. We came out early. We did video, audio recording, web design, and a graphic artist. And it was like, hey, this is a one stop. But it was early on. Before that was, people would be like, oh, that's a great idea, because there wasn't social media. It was just barely maybe even getting started. So it wasn't that kind of, people weren't thinking of like, yeah, I need to have this kind of presence, in different platforms and different media forms. Because so it turned into basically word of mouth, referral.
Gotcha.
And then you just would walk through the door. I mean, so after that first few months, I was like, I'm not selling anymore. It's going to have to just show up, and it did. Thank goodness, So,
Well,
that's a business plan. Like, we're not doing any marketing now. We're just going to look at the door and see if something comes through the door. But it's different back then, because not everybody had that production capability. So so they'd look around, and it was funny because when things were transitioning, back then, if you look in I have a phone book ad. A display ad, and there'd be other production companies in there, and then they'd always be, every year there'd be different ones in there, and then I'd get one or two sad calls every year, guaranteed, at least one or two. They're like, hey, do you have our footage? And I'm like, who are you? And they're like, oh, we're some of the name a company, and they're like, they're not answering their phone, and we can't get our footage. And so they just up and took off, or they disappeared. I'm like, oh, sorry, I don't, I can't help you there. So yeah, so always being there, consistency is important.
Yeah. For especially nowadays with it seems like now everyone's kind of farming out their all their different content that they have to keep producing from the social media, and there's just so much content now to be relevant. I guess you have to just keep producing content after content to keep the flow going. Because the only search engine is I just learned this, like, I don't know, a few months ago, that I knew YouTube you can search, but I didn't realize TikTok you can actually search. So those videos are actually those are the only ones that will stay relevant, where everything else just gets put down below, and people aren't going to be searching on Facebook for your video. So you have to just keep producing content. Same with Instagram, LinkedIn, that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've had clients approach me, and they're like, we need to have. They said, like, well, sometimes they say, we've got a social media person, and they're putting out certain content. I mean, it's just anything. They're just putting out something. But then they're like, well, then they're kind of missing days and weeks, and sometimes there's gaps. And then they're like, so we need more. And I'm like, so they get on these treadmills, and then they're like, they assume they have to just keep treadmilling. But what I've found out and they found out as well, as soon as they looked at it a little closer, is a lot of these treadmills are not ROI anything. There's nothing, they're not gaining business from it. There's businesses that definitely have to use that. But for what they were doing, none of their, and a lot of it wasn't even advertising. It was just kind of like, here's a tip, here's, like you said, the auto generated
educational content type stuff.
Yeah, or this is happening, or they'll say like, hey, I recorded this video of me, and it's got like 5,000 views and massive likes, because we added this new thing to our menu, and I did people show up, and they're like, no, they didn't show up, but 5,000 people liked it or watched it, and so they and sometimes that happens with agencies. I'll produce some content, the agency will run it, and then the sales not necessarily move, but then they'll like throw data at them, like, look, 30,000 engagements here, this many click-throughs here, and then they're like, yeah, we're doing good. And I'm like, what are your sales? And they're like, well, they're the same or they're close to the same. I'm like, okay, so obviously there's something missing. Yeah, you're getting, people are seeing it, but it's, or a whole bunch of bots are seeing it. You never know, because there was this one attorney guy he was paying $5 per click. So it was expensive. And he says every time you put whatever budget you put in there, it was always used up. And he asked Google, he's like, send me who these people are. And they're like, oh, we can't do that. He's like, well, they're not real, are they? He's like, I don't know who's real or who's not, but they're like, there's thousands of dollars there. We're going to burn it up, because if it's there, they find a way to, they're just not going to let it sit there and not be used by, if there's no human response, I really think they find a way to burn that budget up. So fun stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you had mentioned just in our kind of talking back and forth before the podcast, you'd mentioned you did a commercial for Wilkinson Electric that made your demo reel. So maybe tell us a little story behind that commercial. And
okay, yeah. So after SUTV, I went to KSGI, and I was working on their production, and then they said, well, hey, can you go down and shoot Wilkinson's Electronics? And because I think somebody else produced that, and they said they didn't like it. They said, we're not airing it. We don't like it. And I'm like, oh, so you're sending me down? Like, is this going to be a tough shoot? So I'm like, all right, I'll go down. And so I go down there, and since you have an interview with one of the Wilkinsons,
was it the House of Lighting? Was it the
House of Lighting? House of Lighting.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, not Electronics, House of Lighting.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if it was the mom. She was there, the head lady.
Yeah. It was Kay Johnson was her name. She's retired now. Her son Trevor runs the business now.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I go down there, and it was just she was just there, and it was really, so it was a target rich environment. There was all these cool little figurines and chimes, and she was saying, like, she's like, well, I want to hear the music, because a lot of times they pick the wrong music, and I'm like, well, what do you like? And she's like, well, she kind of gave me some description of that. Now I see all these chimes along the ceiling, and I'm like, what do those chimes sound like? And so she's like, oh, well, she rings a few of them. I'm like, I like that sound. So that ended up being the soundtrack for the commercial.
Oh,
started hearing little chimes. So she went and started kind of playing the chimes and starting different chimes. And then there's shots while that's kind of chiming through at this ethereal sound. There was like rack focuses of these figurines and other little cool things that were in the store. And then at the end, the chimes kind of resonate off a little bit. And then you hear her say, Wilkinson's a unique place to shop. And I'm like, and so
I remember that. I remember that little jingle. Yeah.
Do that on a lot of radio stuff. And so then there was a job opening at Falcon Cable. And so I put it on my reel, and usually like demo reels will have just a lot of sizzle. It'll just be like hype, rock and roll music stuff. But I just I'm like, well, this is a cool ad. This is a cool ad. So I put that on there. So it was a very contrasty reel. And then they flew in. Falcon corporate was located in Los Angeles. At the time, they were one of the top 10 largest cable companies. And they flew in the local guy was down there, and then they flew in his boss. And I went up. I was in a casino. I went up to the 15th floor. Go in there. They have a pile of resume tapes and a deck, and I could tell the review. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of competition. There's a whole stack there. And I was like trying to see I recognize some names. I'm like, yeah, I'm going up against that guy. He's good. I'm like, yeah, this might be, I might not be getting this job. This is challenging. So they're anyway. So they interview me, and one of them walks me to the elevator, and he said, then I got the job, and he goes, the reason we picked you is you had contrast. You could show that you could do different treatments, and you could do contrasting things. And so I was like, oh, I'm glad I put Wilkinson's on there, because I think that really, really got me the job. In a probably a high percentage of
Nice. Well,
jumps. So
I'll have to make sure my brother-in-law knows because my brother-in-law is Travis Wilkinson. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I'll have to make sure that he knows. But you had also mentioned, we talked about the, you shot some high-speed video on the test mesa. So maybe tell the audience what a test mesa is and what that was. But just give me any wild or unexpected
Okay.
stories that you
Oh, the
guys
studio.
did
Oh
up
yeah.
there on the. So tell the audience what's the mesa and where's
Okay.
it
So
located and everything.
that's the studio. That's the studio. It was located out in Hurricane.
Okay.
Loved working for the studio. Great people.
Uh-huh.
Awesome people. So we did, production house. We had a studio and everything, like it says, in Stratosphere, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And but they also there was so on the way in design, if you've ever seen that weird bulb thing up there,
Yeah, yeah,
that's the test mesa up there,
yeah.
and it's actually an old Air Force area. They call it. So Area 51.
Mm-hmm.
That was Area 57.
Oh.
So I've worked at Area 57, and believe it or not, there's a lot of people that have UFO stories. So the Air Force abandoned it. So and then like a Goodrich Aerospace or some other companies will use that facility. So it's private now, but they do definitely contract into for example, they have let me just explain what it looks like. So there's a 2-mile long heavy duty track. It's like industrial strength railroad type of track. And it's actually so long, they have to adjust it for the curvature of the earth. And it goes clear to the end of the mesa where the road is going into Zion.
Uh-huh.
And so they have a jet cockpits they can put ejection seats in.
Uh-huh.
And they'll fire these rocket sleds. They'll put on these pusher sleds and these rockets, and it'll just launch it down clear from the other end of the mesa down to the other side. And Air Force they didn't have sophisticated test dummies like they have now, so they'd use monkeys, and they'd launch, and they wouldn't stop it at the end of the track. They just launch them right off the cliff and fly almost into Hurricane. I mean, it's crazy. I'm like, what were you guys doing up here? And they're like, well, we're launching monkeys, I guess, in the 50s or whatever. So when I got up there, and we had to do because there was a British Royal Navy up there. I won't tell you what the devices were, but they were like defensive devices, for defense, like with the Royal Navy. But we were testing. The Navy was up there testing.
This is when you were up there?
Yeah, this was when I was up there. This is the later mid 90s.
Uh-huh.
And they were testing ejection seats for women pilots for F-18s. So Navy personnel, technical people are up there. And so there's a tower up there. You can see it from the west side. If you look closely, there's a tower up there on the edge. It's actually from an old battleship or some kind of naval ship. And that's where I'd usually be positioned. It's scary because you climb up these ladders and you're looking up over the cliff, and you go up the top, and then you can see out over the horizon and all this sagebrush, right? And then they'd have high-speed film cameras in the cockpit in different positions, and video cameras, and then we'd have this briefing early in the morning before, and then we'd see the slow motion. So it gives you a distorted view because you see these, the
test dummy.
Test dummy,
yeah. Well, hey, I just want to stop you too.
Yeah,
I just remembered the location too. So just in case people aren't really familiar with Zion National Park, but it's where if you guys are familiar with the Red Bull Rampage, that big, I think it's the number one mountain biking contest worldwide is out there, right close by there. Anyway, I just want to throw that out there. Okay, so anyway.
That's where it is. And so, there's actually a lot of buildings up there, and it's a secure. I mean, I guess you can get a lot of trouble if you break in and get caught.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's still got some. Yeah, because they needed. Well, this is kind of. I don't know if I want to get on a tangent here, but let me go back to the track. So we'd be up there, and then you couldn't cross the track once they kind of went hot because it comes down. So they can set the speed. Sometimes it breaks the sound barrier.
Wow.
And so it's really cool because you'll hear the 3, 2 on the radios, and then 0 time, and then all of a sudden, and you see some fire off in the distance, and just just comes flying up there. And if it breaks the sound barrier, it's on the ground, right? And you'll see this pressure wave go boom and just fly out through the sagebrush. And then, so like I was going back to the briefing, they show you the slow motion. So you see the test dummy in there, and it's riding down the track. It's like, whoa. It's really slowed down. It's like 800 frames, 400 frames, or whatever it is. And it shows it, you know, the canopy fly off, and then just like, whoa, and the rockets take it out. So it looks like, oh, this will be easy to shoot. It's just like, woo, follow it up. But then now, when it gets to the trigger point, you have those strobes. They go boom, and then it boom, two ejections. It's like instantaneous. There's no delay between the first and when you're watching the film from the previous test. It's slow, but it's just like that, and then you have to follow it, and you know there's a lot of pressure to follow it because they want to see what happens, and so that's
what you were shooting. Then you were shooting these. What was it? The test. Okay, the test for the ejections for women.
Yeah, there was always a test. Yeah, so and sometimes they do a 0-0 test, so that means it just sits there and it just launches out, and then or they'll, like I said, they usually use knots for the speed. And it depends on the humidity and stuff like that, where the sound barrier will be broke. So it's not always the same speed. So because sometimes they'll have it break the sound barrier, and they're like, "Ooh, that wasn't supposed to," and then the cockpit will fly over there, and they built this water trough, and it'll just fly in there, you know, 700 miles an hour, and it hits the water, and the water just goes, whoa! And then if that doesn't stop, but they actually put this cement block with rebar, so it'll destroy the cockpit, so nothing flies off, because there's too many people down there now. You can't have a monkey or a cockpit with a mannequin, and they're like, hey, you're gonna land in your backyard now. And so so it's very exciting. It's like a lot of waiting, but then it's very exciting. And then one time, there's a hangar that has all their old test dummies, and they're creepy looking. They're faceless. And if I was in there alone one time and I'm looking at them, it's just, I got really kind of creeped out. You know, they're just hanging on the wall. They look like they're going to jump off, you know, like iRobot, you know, they're just going to like jump off and get you. But the ones, the test dummies they're using, each of them were $1 million or so.
Wow.
So this guy, so yeah, they pick up all the stresses, because you really, if you're in a jet, you really don't want to just eject for fun, because it compresses you like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
So one time, they launched the thing, and the parachute, the seat cuts away, the system cuts the seat away, and then the parachute comes down and one time a dummy landed, and the parachute went across the track. So the cockpit already went down there, but the pusher sleds that kind of, after the rockets go off, it just falls away and it pulls away, but it's still moving fast. So all of a sudden the parachute goes across, all of a sudden this pusher sled a little bit later comes and grabs the parachute and drags the dummy. And it just tears up the dummy, you know, it just pulls it.
$1 million dummy.
$1 million dummy. And so we hear on the radio, like, hey, they're like, the guy's coming down to find the dummy, you know, to get he's like, hey, where's the dummy? And there's some guys that work there, you know, they've been there for years. They can tell you stories. He's like, everybody's quiet, like no one wants to tell him what happened. And then finally he's like, where is that number 2? Where's number 2? And you hear this guy get on the radio, he goes, and it's kind of like, you know, this, I don't know, distinctive voice, like, you better bring a box down here, bud. Also, we hear like this vehicle coming in there like 100 miles an hour, flying in there. He's like, I've got it. Anyway, we felt bad for him because there was an arm there, a leg there. Oh, he was not happy. And then
what caused it? Was just a malfunction or something?
It's just where the parachute landed. It drifted off, and then it landed off to the side, and you know, then the little breeze just fell across the track.
Oh, gotcha.
It didn't happen before, and then the pusher sled came to, you know, it was maybe going like 100 miles an hour, which is still fast, but not as fast as the other stuff. But then the British Navy was there, and this is when I was. So they were going to do testing there, and then they were going to have us go to Wales, off the coast of Wales, and test it on an actual ship.
Oh, wow.
And so this British guy comes in. He's like, "So you're going to be one of the guys that," he goes, "that are come over?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think so." He goes, "Well, it's going to try your soul, but we'll be glad to have, it's going to be, it's like, it's not going to be easy." Like, I don't know why he said that, but
Did
it's a
you
British,
did you
it
end
was,
up going or not?
no, no, I ended up, well, it was my, I would have been gone for a month, and I would have missed the birth of my first son.
Oh,
So I'm like, "Ooh, I really want to go, but I'm not going to miss that." So
yeah,
I stayed, and so yeah, it would have been a cool experience too. But so they'd fire off their defensive device.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, it'd be on the back of a ship, and it has a device hanging on a drogue chute,
Uh-huh.
and it'll float around. It'll just kind of like, and the device will kind of spin, and it'll just kind of float around, hover. I kid you not, people from down in the valley, usually old ladies, will call up and say, "There's a UFO above you." There's people are calling UFOs. They call 911. There's a UFO. It was so the rumor is true, and one of the guys, when we had some off time, there's actually a hole, like a lava, like a drop off, and it goes down, and then there's kind of like some tunnels and water, and
Uh-huh.
animals will fall in there. You can't get out. It's deep. It's
Uh-huh.
like 20 feet deep. And he goes, "This is where we keep the aliens in the cave, or at least that's what everybody thinks." So they have all this folklore. But
Uh-huh.
before I actually went up there and did the test mesa, they the Tomahawk cruise missile.
Uh-huh.
They actually tested them up there. They'd have them covered up, and they'd wait for the Russian satellites to go over, because it's not secret now. Everybody knows Tomahawks, but
Yeah.
so they'd wait for the all clear from the government. Like, yeah, the satellites are not over right now. They'd uncover a Tomahawk cruise missile, and they had these two giant telephone poles. They'd raise up a net.
Mm-hmm.
They'd launch the cruise missile. It'd fly around the mesa a few times. They'd catch it in the net, grab it, cover it up, wait, and then satellites would pass over. And so because they didn't want to, they didn't like, we do not want them to see what we're doing, because this is new tech, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Were you
You
up
know,
there at that time?
no, this is before I was up there.
Oh, before you up there.
This was up there, and I think they're still doing testing up there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the studio kind of after I left, it was within 6 months, I think. Well, it was actually 9/11 happened not too long after I left, and I think within 6 months, the studio kind of dissolved, but they were still doing testing and some production.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it was a year. I don't know. Sometime after that, it changed. But so yeah, they had they'd say, like, "Yeah, we're going to be testing this interesting thing." I mean, I don't want to say what it is, but it's kind of like creepy stuff. I'm like, man, it's like stuff's that smart, Like, they're like, "Yeah, it knows where that asset is, and it knows where that asset is, and it'll move over here and hide." I'm like, "Ooh, I don't want to test that." Anyway, so
Wow,
yeah,
that probably do a whole show on that.
oh yeah, there's yeah.
So when's the last time you've been up there then?
It was around 2000, I think.
Oh, okay. So
20,
it's been a while.
a long time. Yeah, this at the studio, so that was like late 90s
Uh-huh.
for a few years, and then 2001, I
Uh-huh.
think that's right. And
I'm sure you could YouTube. Someone's probably done a little bit of a documentary on it or something. I'll bet you.
Well,
Maybe not.
well, if you're actively working for them, you can't be like, "Hey, we're doing this or that." So that's why I'm not saying anything, because like when we did the British thing, I got fingerprinted. I went through Interpol,
Mm-hmm.
FBI.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah,
Wow.
they just want to, just kind of assure them that we're not like somebody's like trying to find out what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stuff like that. But I mean, ejection seats, it's like you're not going to steal anything. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
other than like they failed. They don't have seats for the women yet. So,
Uh-huh.
but they can just, because you don't want the seat to go off too powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Just a side note here, through all these different places I've worked, I've learned a lot of things. I've met a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I really cherish is, and it's just average people. Some people are, really talented in some things, but I've always learned something really valuable. As we've done because you get in these topics and you learn about, like when at the studio, we also worked for Viacom. They were doing all these educational videos.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd send out a crew and they'd go to Louisville Slugger bat thing and how they
Oh,
make it in the history
uh-huh.
about the Kaibat squirrel, about airbags. I was terrified of my airbag. We did a whole thing on that, the airbag technologies
Uh-huh.
and everything that's in there. I was like, man, this is terrifying. It's explosive charge. Well, there's kind of two different types. So I'm like, either one's kind of terrifying. It's like you don't want to be heading on the steering wheel when it goes off because it's just anyway. So learn things like that. So yeah, we could talk about the test mesa for sure. There's
Go, let's do it. It's good stuff.
well, not the test mesa, but so this is still at the studio since we're on that. So back in the 90s, you remember a network marketing multi-level?
Mm-hmm.
It was really big back then.
Oh yeah, back in the
And
90s.
so we did like videos for multi-level marketing companies for their videos and roll-ins and their
Mm-hmm.
products. And it was a blast. I mean, everybody at one point might have got involved with Amway. You know, you have that $150 box of soap and socks and toothpaste, and you're hitting yourself over the back of the head down the street trying to sell it. Like, you know, I'm making fun of it, but I'm, you know, I think they're fine, and sorry if there's still Amway going around, but so we did like Aola, and just a blast doing those videos.
Uh-huh.
So much fun, so much creativity. And they'd have their conventions, and you remember American Gladiators?
Oh yeah,
you know, yeah. So they had Jim Laser Star, one of the main. So he came in. He came down, like they have their stage, and then he comes down on a rope and from the top of the stage, and then he'd take him on a run. You know, like you got to go. It's just crazy stuff.
And you're doing all the video and all that.
Yeah, we're doing. Yeah, they're like, hey, like we do like a Superman like flies in, like our CEO or somebody like that flies in, or Jim Laser, or somebody flies in. So we do this like green screen, and they fly across this, and then we show them landing on the roof of the Dixie Center, wherever they're having it, climbing down there, and then they come flying down on a rope, so the video connects in. So roll-ins that like connect into different things, and
I think they kind of did. They did that for the Olympics with Tom Cruise. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
That kind of a similar thing.
That kind of thing. Well, even back in the day, like Tuacahn, they had some roll-ins. We did the Wizard of Oz a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the Great Oz, and you know the fire, and it was really cool. So a lot of fun doing roll-ins for that. But yeah, well, actually, that was with my own business, but it reminds me of that. Doing the kind of the different there were so many companies back then. I was trying to remember on that.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays it seems like there's just so many. Now everybody can get into video production and editing and stuff because there's just tools at your fingertips, cost effective.
Yeah.
Maybe give an insight if you were to with all the technology now, and someone wanted to get in and they kind of have a passion for videography or just any type of creativity that way. What would be your advice for someone that's maybe starting a company that's doing something like that?
Well, yeah. So it's I'd say, well, that's kind of hard advice to give because it depends on what they're talented at.
Oh,
like, you can edit or you can shoot really well. So, I mean, I guess there's a number of ways now. So just starting a company could be somewhat difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a good approach might be is getting in an association with some other talented people,
mm-hmm.
and then offering the service. And then if you get to where you're like, okay, I know how to really deliver for these type of clients,
mm-hmm.
then break off if that
mm-hmm.
warrants it. But yeah, it'd be difficult to just kind of buy the equipment, have all the gear, all the cameras. Like, okay, now I know how to do production, and let's just get the clients. It's a lot different now because, like you said, everybody can do production. So, and a lot of companies now they'll have kind of the weekend warriors. They're like, oh, we got somebody that does that, and then a lot of times that'll work for them because they can spend all weekend long doing something that probably take 3 hours normally.
Yeah.
but then again, the company sides a lot of times thought the person will leave, and then they're like they a lot of times the footage goes with them, or they don't leave enough remnants for them to figure out what they were doing. And
Oh.
so there's some dangers in that, and that's so if you're starting out, that's one thing you can offer is like, look, I'm going to be here, I'm going to archive things, I'm going to be reliable. In fact, I myself, I help game plan, like, so what are we trying to do? Like, there was a trucking company, they're like, hey, we're down, I think I was talking about this before, but we're down 8 or 9 drivers. What do we do? Like, we're losing thousands a day with those trucks just sitting right there. And they point over, I'm like, oh, okay, let's figure something out. So, and they were trying marketing, they were trying all kinds of things. And so it just wasn't getting traction. So we tried a different approach. And then I said, like, long term, we can build up some assets, because I think you're going to need some certain things on your website. So you can find a niche, you can find a way to deliver it. I'm going to be helping with agency. A national brand is going to be shooting a commercial here in 2 locations. I'm going to take a team over to the first location. The main team's going to go over there, and I guess their director directed one of the Super Bowl ads. So his I guess from what I heard is he started out shooting nice video content, and then he moved his way to the director. So there's different avenues. So with companies, or embed in find a company that probably could use it, and if you know how to do it, and that. So I mean, that's the thing. You can know how to edit, but nowadays you kind of have to have some marketing savvy. Where it's helpful. It's helpful.
Yeah, gotcha. Do you know anything about the Kevin Costner studio coming to St. George, Utah?
I heard about it, but that's all I know. I saw, like, I think it was like a little news clip, a news snippet of that they're going to build which is cool, because over the years there was always rumors like somebody's building a movie studio here, and like every time, and it never appeared. And then the studio had a studio. So I guess if there's a lot of crews that are planning on coming in, they could have a good base camp there.
Yeah.
If but what I'm wondering is how much local use would use a full studio, because I've seen one before and it gets used here and there, just like I was talking about Maverick Productions down in
Texas,
San Antonio.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a huge sound stage, and then a smaller green screen area, which is still big to me, and all these big production trucks. So it's what use is it? I mean, is there a lot of other production companies that be like, okay, if that's there, I'm gonna rent out. But maybe there is a lot of people that are gonna possibly do on-set things. And I could see it working with, say they're doing a Western again, and they build a Western interior set on that studio stage.
Oh, yeah, gotcha.
And we have all our actors in the area, so they don't have to fly them out back to California or Florida or Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
Doing production. So I could see that working well, but I don't know. Maybe they're trying to. Maybe there's some new. Okay, that's our in, Jeff. We're going to do Josh 2 at Costner Studio.
Yeah.
Costner's going to be.
No, you're going to do your part 2 of your sci-fi movie.
Oh yeah. I'll bring back the original cast, and I think one of the guys, he's the head of the theater department down at UNLV, so he's close by. The big guy, the big guy that like kills everybody, and that he runs into.
That's great. So if you were to kind of go back and give yourself some advice from the very beginning of your career, what kind of advice would you give yourself?
I would say, going back to the people I met and the things I learned, I would have spent more time with them. I think I would have. I was like, because there's so many fascinating things, from the testing to just simple, of like products,
Mm-hmm.
services, and then insights. I mean, I was doing an edit. It was like for a week with a client, and he's like, "I'm going to take you to lunch." And this is when I was about before I was going to have my first born again for my son.
Oh,
Firstborn. What am I saying? First kid. And he took me to lunch, and he's like, well, tell me, like, what's your family like? I'm like, well, I'm gonna have a kid in July. And he's like, oh, he goes, yeah, I have like quite a few grown kids. And he goes, and he started choking up. He goes, let me tell you something. He goes, I worked so much, I didn't spend time with them. When they said like, hey, come play with me, Dad, he goes, I didn't. He goes, hardly ever. He goes, and I had a kid way separate, almost like a different family kid. He goes, and so I made sure I tried to make up time with the older ones. He goes, it was too late. I didn't enjoy it. He goes, he says, I wish I enjoyed every minute. And he goes, and so that advice, he goes, I hope you'll do that. And I did. And so, nice. And I told my wife, I told my wife about that. And I go, and so, because you'll regret those times where you didn't. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, so that's just an example.
Great insight.
Somebody will tell me something, and he tried to make it. He really spent a lot of time with his really late young son. So
gotcha.
Anyway, yeah.
No, that's great. So if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, and if they wanted to hire you, what's some of the services that you offer, and how would they get a hold of you and be able to find out what they can do for them?
Well, just Google me, I guess. Strategic Media Productions, Strategic Media. Give me a call. Clients, any business, product or service, and I can collaborate with. If you have existing footage or people, I work with people in agencies. So it just depends on, and what I really like is once I learn what you like and what works, then it's nirvana. It's like, because I've had clients I've had for like 15 years or more. And it's just, once we got it locked in, it's locked in. But I also like at first I turned them down because I have people come in there like, I've got this great idea. I'm not going to put a dime in, but if you'll produce these videos, we're going to make a lot of money. And so I was like, well, maybe if you put in some, and then maybe I'll meet halfway. Oh, well, no, it's going to work. I don't need to. I'm like, no, I don't want to do it. But then eventually I'm like, somebody has a service. I'm like, ooh, this could be big. So I'll actually say like, hey, you've been doing all these videos and you're not getting anywhere. And they're like, yeah. I go, I've got an idea. I'll produce it, but I got to produce it the way I want to do it. And then you can put your input in. When I say do it the way I want to do it, so I know what's going to probably work best, at least in my opinion. And so the thing is, I have a lot of bad ideas that work a lot of the times. I say, so if you have an idea or something you want to execute, and there's a lot of options. I mean, people always look at digital, but there's still, the couch potato is alive and well. There's still linear TV. They're there, and it's a different audience, and it's almost like the theater filling up the same people for the most part every time, as opposed to like hitting 1,000 people and then another 1,000 different people and another 1,000 different people. It's like it's really a lot different. And surprisingly, people are like, well, I need 8 impressions, then it's going to sell. I'm like, I found it that like sometimes it's way more, like 25 up.
Thanks so much for coming on, Paul, and taking the time today to get on here and talk a little bit about your business and your background. And I so appreciate it. And can't wait for the audience to hear these little nuggets that we've talked about today. So thanks again.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Yeah.
That wraps up another episode of the Jeff Glines Show. A huge thank you to my guest, Paul Southwick, for sharing his incredible insights today. If you're ever in the Zion National Park area in Utah, be sure to check out the fascinating flying monkey test site that we talked about. It definitely is a piece of history and adventure you don't want to miss. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so connect with me on social media or drop a review on your favorite podcast platform. And hey, if you haven't already, hit the follow button to stay up to date with more inspiring stories and actionable insights from amazing guests like Paul. Until next time, keep chasing your passions and living your best story. I'm Jeff Glines, and thanks for tuning in.